In today's video, we're going to be going over how to buy a used dirt bike. Because there is a little bit of a game that goes into it, and just knowing some of the tips and tricks to knowing what you're getting and getting a good deal can help tremendously. So the first step is behind the computer. Now, this is just getting everything out of the way that you can before you physically go and look at the bike. So the first thing that I would recommend, especially if you are new to the sport and this is your first dirt bike, is finding a buddy, whether it be a friend or a family member that rides dirt bikes or knows stuff about it, that can help you through this process. This will help you from making a poor decision just based out of excitement, and they can help look out for things that could potentially be red flags. Now secondly, have an idea of what you are looking for. So before you actually make the decision to buy a dirt bike, try to do some research and figure out just what it is you want or would prefer, such as what brand you would like, what size of dirt bike you would like, whether you'd like a 2-stroke or a 4-stroke, how old you're willing to let the bike be, if you're willing to put some time and investments into it to get it going, or if it's an old bike and you're ready to accept that there will be problems down the road, but you're the person that has a lot of fun fixing that type of thing. It's not very good to jump into the used bike market without having any idea what you want. Next, when you're actually looking at bikes, try to avoid anything sketchy, such as if the seller just posted images that were obviously downloaded from online and not pictures that he took himself. That can be a big red flag. Or if the person has the bike mistitled as to what brand or what year or size it is. Or if you look at the pictures and you know what the bike itself books for and they are way overpriced or way underpriced, it really just comes down to using your common sense in this step. Next, once you've found a bike that you're interested, call the seller over the phone. Now, it's really good to ask and get some important questions out of the way before you take it a step further and come look at the bike. This can be questions like, why are you selling it? Are you the original owner? How many owners has it had? Or are you the original owner? Do you have the title in hand? What type of riding did you do on this bike? How often did you maintain it? And ask them if they're okay with you checking and looking everything over when you come to look at it. Step 2, look at the bike. Now, once you've gotten everything out of the way over the phone and researching and you really are interested in this bike and you want to take it a step further and go and actually look at it, here are some tips that can definitely help. Now, going back to our first one, it really helps to bring a buddy with you. You are more likely to be confident if you have a friend with you, and once again, they can help stop you from making a poor decision just out of excitement. And if the person's a serial killer, you have some backup. That's probably the main one, just saying. You don't need to be scared though, but maybe you should, just a little. So now onto the first actual step of when you get there to look at the bike. Fill the engine and see if it's warm. If it is warm, the seller has probably started it up before you got there and got everything warmed up, which means that the bike probably has issues and is hard to start. So they warmed it up so that it wouldn't be when you got there. Next, just check over the obvious things, such as seat cover, plastics, tires, and just the looks of the engine. Obviously, there's always going to be some scratches and dings here and there, but if the plastics are completely rotted, the seat cover's torn and rotted away, the tires are completely bald, the engine's rusty everywhere, it's got oil leaks, then that's obviously not good, unless that's what you're paying for. Step 3, start to check over the chassis. Sit on the bike with your hands on the bars, looking at the front fender and the front wheel, and make sure that the bars are aligned and they aren't twisted or bent. Next, you can check the subframe by simply just standing from the rear of the bike and seeing if the fender lines up with the rear wheel. If it is straight, then you're good to go. If it is twisted or shifted off to the side, then that means you have a bent subframe. Then check the seals of the fork and the shock. If you compress the fork or the shock and it leaves a oil residue or a little ring of oil, that means that the fork seals are leaking and will need to be rebuilt. Next, check the wheels. You can make your way around the wheel with your hand, pinching the spokes together to make sure that all the spokes are tight, they're all there, and none of them are cracked. Then you can spin the wheel to see if it isn't true or if it's bent or out of true. Then it is good to check the bearings. You can check the linkage bearings to see if they are worn out by having the bike on a stand and lifting on the rear wheel. If you feel some slack when you lift up, that means that the bearings are wore out, and depending on how bad it is, they may need to be replaced. Now, same thing with the wheel bearings. You can shake the wheel side to side, and if there is side to side slack in the wheel, that means that the wheel bearings are worn as well and may need to be replaced. And then the last bearing that is good to check is the steering head bearing. Now you can do this by having the bike on the ground, pressing the front brake so that it won't roll forward, and rocking it back and forth. If you can feel slack right there in the head tube, then that means that those bearings could be worn as well. Then you can check the brakes. You can check to see if the rotor is worn out by looking for lines, which as you can see my bike does have lines on it, but sometimes that's okay. So next you can run your finger up and down it to check and see if there's any notches in the rotor. If you can feel some, then that means the rotor is wore out and it will need to be replaced. If not, then you are good. Then while you're at it, you can go ahead and check the brake pads and see how much pad is left on it. If they are completely worn out or getting close to, that means that your brake pads will need to be replaced soon. If there's still plenty of pad left on it, then you are good to go. And then lastly, as far as the chassis of the bike, you can check the drivetrain. Now, to check the sprocket, teeth will usually have quite a bit of material on them if it is good, and may even have a flat spot at the top. If it is really sharp and pointy looking and even has a wave in the teeth, then that means the sprocket is worn out. And if it's so bad that it started to wear out the top of the teeth to where the teeth are becoming short, then it definitely needs to be replaced. Same with the front sprocket, and you can check the chain by simply pulling it on the back of the sprocket and looking for slack. If there is a lot of slack there, that could be wore out. And you can check side to side movement in the chain, and if there is a lot, then the chain is wore out as well. And then you can check the chain sliders just by seeing how much material is left on them. If it is really thin and jagged looking and worn down, then that means they're obviously wore out and will probably need to be replaced. But if they still have plenty of material left on them, then they're good to go. Now, step 4, check over the engine. The first thing that you can do when you're looking to check the engine is just pull the radiator cap off and see if there is coolant in there. Then you can check the engine and transmission oil, or if it's the 2-stroke, just the transmission oil. And if it doesn't have a dipstick like my bike, you can place your finger in there and lay the bike over until oil touches your finger. Then you know the oil's in there, and then you can look at the color of the oil to see what type of condition it's in. Obviously, if the oil is black, doesn't mean that much, it just means it needs to be replaced, but these things could be signs of a poorly maintained bike, which could mean that there's bigger problems down the road. Then, an important one is to check the air filter. Now, most bikes you can do this by pulling the seat off with either a 10 or a 8mm socket, or if it is a bike manufactured and designed by KTM, you can usually just pull a little side cover off and you have access to the air filter there. Then, if the air filter looks good and cleaned and oiled, that is a good sign, but it is really good to take it just a step further and pull the air filter itself off and look inside of the air boot. Because if there is sand and dirt in there, that can definitely lead to some big problems. Then you can check the compression that the bike has just by putting your foot or your hand on the kickstart and going down slowly to get a feel for it. Now, to know if it has good compression, you can either use a compression tester, but most people will be able to just go off a feel. If the kickstart almost falls to the bottom and there's no pressure in between, then that means the engine may need to be rebuilt. This is where it could help to bring a buddy with you who has been riding bikes for a while, as they can usually feel if a bike has good compression or not. And step 5 is to test ride the bike. Now, if the seller isn't okay with you test riding the bike, I would personally walk away from the deal right there. But if the person is just really worried about having someone else ride their bike before buying it, at least watch them ride it down the road and back a few times and make sure that it runs and looks good. Now, assuming that the bike started well, it's time to take it down the road and test just a few things, such as testing out the brakes and making sure they have a good feel to them, making sure they stop well, and just do what brakes are supposed to do. And checking the clutch, making sure that the bike shifts smoothly, doesn't stall or inch forward when it's pulled in all the way. And you can check to see if the clutch slips by putting it in a high gear such as 3rd and starting out from a low speed and giving it a handful of throttle. If the clutch is weak, it should slip right then. If not, then you're good to go. Then obviously checking and just seeing how the engine feels. Letting off the throttle and having the bike slow down itself without any brake is a good way to test and see if the bike backfires. If the bike backfires, maybe if it's a 4-stroke, it needs some valve adjustments. Step 6, negotiating. Now, assuming that it's went good up to this point and you are ready to make the deal, it comes down time to negotiate a little bit If the seller is just kind of a disrespectful, snobby, rich kid type person, then it's not gonna matter. You can play this game as hard as you want. But if it's someone who is just selling his bike so that he can support his family during a financially rough time, then obviously just be a good person. Now, it definitely helps to do a little bit of research on negotiating and finding out some of the mental tips and tricks that psychologists have found over the years. And if you found any major problems after checking everything over on the bike, now is a good time to bring it up. Now, keep in mind that almost every dirt bike is going to have a few little dings and problems here and there, especially after following all these steps for making this video on my own bike. You could definitely point out a ton of things wrong with it, as I ride a lot.
Well, let's look and see what we got here. 500 hours. You haven't been alive that long? Missing a bolt right here. That's nice. What is this? Oh, it's supposed to do that? Just testing you. Huge dent in the pipe right here. Another one right here. It's 250, but it probably doesn't even have the power of a 125 with this pipe. It's obviously had a little use. What even happened right here? How do you even scratch a wheel? White grips, white seat cover on a machine that's made to ride in dirt. You're obviously not the best at making decisions, aren't you?